despite it all, despite all of the brouhaha over whether there was a client list or not, the reality is an innocent woman is in jail.
Hello and welcome back to the Americano Show. Today we are going to be talking about Jeffrey Epstein because on Sunday night, the FBI and the Department of Justice, that's Donald Trump's FBI and his Department of Justice, released statements saying that in fact there had been no client list of Jeffrey Epstein. That client list refers to the rich and powerful people it's thought that Jeffrey Epstein had somehow compromised or compromised through his sexual crimes against young women and girls. And it also said that there was no evidence to suggest that Jeffrey Epstein had not killed himself. These allegations have been met with quite a lot of suspicion from within Trump world because the Trump administration campaigned, and key figures like Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, campaigned on the fact that they were going to expose the Epstein list, the Epstein files. And suddenly Sunday night, things seem to have been drawn blank. To discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by Ian Maxwell, who is a British businessman and the brother of Ghislaine Maxwell, who is currently serving time in Florida because of her connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Ian, thank you very much for coming on. First of all, I think I'd like to ask you about your reaction to this news on Sunday night. The Department of Justice and the FBI saying that there is no client list and that Jeffrey Epstein acted alone and did, in fact, kill himself as far as the evidence is concerned.
I don't think there was anything that was too surprising dealing with the three central pieces of information. One, that there was no client list. My sister has always maintained that there never was such a thing. It never existed. And one of the accuser's early attorneys, a man called Brad Edwards, in a book that he published perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, also came to the same conclusion. In other words, that Epstein was in this for himself and his own bizarre sexual predilections. And the reason that this has become such a hot button issue is because following the arrest of Epstein in 2019 and also a number of scurrilous allegations made by a lady called Virginia Giuffre that she had been trafficked to presidents and highfalutin people up and down, that just set off a wild goose chase, which has been echoed and re-echoed in social media and given tremendous currency by people like Elon Musk. And it's just got a life of its own and taken up as a huge conspiracy item. That's what's happened. Of course, they're going to be disappointed because if you prick a conspiracy and the balloon goes down, a lot of people wonder why they've been fooled or how. And is this yet another deep state story? My sister has never thought there was any such thing. There wasn't such a thing. And so there were no surprise there. That's as far as the client list is concerned. Second item was that the DOJ and the FBI have concurred absolutely that Epstein killed himself. There, I think there is more substance to different and opposing views, notably that he, in fact, was murdered. That is and remains my sister's view, for what it's worth, and a lot of other people, not least the Epstein's own family, commissioned an autopsy by a really serious pathologist to look into the injuries sustained by Epstein, which he considers are entirely consistent with strangulation and not hanging. So I think the jury's out on there. But anyway, the DOJ and FBI have concluded that that is what's happened. And they further say that there is this raft of digital a trove of digital information, 300 gigabytes of it, from which they've concluded that there is no evidence of further third-party criminal activity that they can glean from it. And therefore, they've reached the conclusion that's the end of the road. It's finished, which, for what it's worth, does, I think, certainly the president would be pleased that they've concluded that, and probably other people as well. But anyway, that's my take on it.
You said that your sister thinks that murder is the more likely explanation of...
It is. I mean, people seem to think that this involves some sort of James Bond figure slipping into the prison to do him down. It seems to preclude another way in which that might have happened, by him actually paying somebody inside the prison to kill him. It's like a sort of suicide by internal killing, on the grounds that perhaps he had reached a point where he couldn't see there was any exit to what was coming down the pike. So that might be a possibility. The pictures, I don't think, are terribly conclusive one way or the other.
No, there's a long video that the Department of Justice have released, which people have already noticed that there's a minute missing, crucially, and it could easily be manipulated. And of course, there was the video footage that seemed to go missing from other parts of the Manhattan prison. But if it wasn't murder by commission, as you suggest, or suicide by commission, which would have been a very peculiar scenario, who do you or who does Ghislaine think could be behind the killing?
I haven't talked to Ghislaine about this. The few video conversations or telephone conversations we have are listened to by the authorities in the prison. She's not going to suddenly start talking about such sensitive matters, even to me, her brother. So I can't speak for her in terms of who she thinks could be a culprit, and I don't have a view myself. I'm perfectly content with the suicide position. I mean, the reality is the man is dead, so it really doesn't matter one way or the other. And on the back of the conclusion that there's no client list, and so there's no obvious person or persons that could be pointed to.
Well, going back to the first point about the client list, you can understand, can you not, why a lot of people are highly suspicious about this case. Epstein was... he got away with it almost the first time. He was pardoned when he shouldn't have been. He was let out of jail when he probably shouldn't have been. He was then allowed to carry on committing crimes. And there's a lot of mystery around how his whole operation worked, where all of his money came from. And there's a lot of suspicion that he may have been acting on behalf of security agencies, whether they be American or another foreign government. What do you make of those theories?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of information that has not come out. I mean, I think I can express this perhaps most simply in the case of my own sister, which I know better than other elements of this matter that we can come to. It's quite clear now from evidence that has emerged post-trial. Her trial concluded in tail end of 2021, that the government withheld information that should have been given to her defense. This is known as Brady material or exculpatory material under the English system. A huge amount of information relating to the 2006 indictment of Jeffrey Epstein, the first time that he was subject to criminal investigation. That information was withheld deliberately by the government, and we now know that from a variety of sources, from information caused to be released by Governor DeSantis, being the transcripts of the 206 grand jury trial, from a very, very detailed 300 plus page report by the government, the DOJ's own Office of Professional Responsibility, that investigated the original criminal investigation of Epstein, and from extraordinarily a freedom of information action by Radar Online, which has no less a figure than Maureen Comey, the daughter of the former head of the FBI, the lady who has had a disaster with the Diddy Coombs investigation last week, when a huge government overreach and they completely ballsed it up. And there she is on oath saying that she had held back potentially exculpatory material from the defense, lest it could be used in a future trial should any appeal succeed. So that's just a few examples in the case of my own sister, where the government has withheld information. This isn't just me speaking as Ghislaine's brother. It's a fact. And we get to a situation where you recall there was a lying juror, a juror 50 at the time of the trial, who had failed to disclose his prior sexual abuse, and was subsequently revealed during a conversation with a journalist that he had post the trial, and was the cause of a separate hearing in front of the trial judge in order to get to the bottom of it. And following a subsequent publication by this journalist of a book, it's quite clear that he lied. So all of this leads to an inexorable conclusion that if any of these Brady points or juror point were to be followed up, that there has been a very likely miscarriage of justice, and that the conviction of my sister is deeply unsafe. So it follows, therefore, by extension, that if the government has withheld that kind of information because it's inconvenient, that it may also have withheld information relating to the balance of the Epstein files. So, okay, I mean, I personally think they have probably exhausted the full extent of it, but I understand that people will be unhappy, but there it is.
Well, I remember when you came on to The Spectator last time, quite a few years ago now, you said that you thought that your sister was being punished for Epstein's crimes, that the fact that the government failed to prosecute him properly, and that the original case seems to have been very dubious, but there was a miscarriage of justice there in the other way with Epstein in 2006. And that, I suppose your speculation then would be that this was a sort of counter-reaction or an attempt to correct a mistake by punishing your sister because they couldn't punish Epstein because he died.
I mean, I think the position is this, that the mistakes of the government, omitted or committed, are so serious that Ghislaine has launched a petition to the Supreme Court, the basis of which is that she should never have been tried, let alone convicted, on the grounds that the non-prosecution agreement, which had been reached between Epstein and the government, did not apply to her. That is the government's position. And the reason that they have managed to get in this is that they chose to run the case against Ghislaine in New York. Had they attempted to run it in 25 other states, almost certainly they would not have got home. because the non-prosecution agreement basically says if you are in Florida or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or wherever, Alaska, that if the state attorney general makes an agreement as United States with a defendant, that agreement applies nationally. In other words, you cannot abrogate the agreement just because you happen to be in New York. However, it so happens that the appeal court circuit of New York, along with one other circuit out of the 13 circuits that make up the United States appeal system, has elected to say that that is not true. In other words, that New York will not respect what happens in Florida or Pennsylvania or anywhere else, because New York is New York. So the subject of Ghislaine's petition to the appeal court is to say, look, you cannot shop a prosecution. You can't, just because you don't like what's like to go down in Florida, you can't take it to New York. It's basically wrong, and it is unfair, and it should never have happened. The government's really in trouble here, because it has requested not once, but 2 extensions from the Supreme Court in order to put in evidence. The Supreme Court very rarely requires the government ever to put in evidence, and the government mostly never does for a Supreme Court petitions. But in this case, they have indicated they wish to. So we are a little surprised at how it's going. We don't know whether the Supreme Court is going to take this case. They take very few cases in any given year. You know, there might be 10,000 appeals. They might only take 200 cases. So, you know, it's tight. And it, just because they might not take Ghislaine's case doesn't mean that she hasn't got a case. It's just that there's a lot of cases to listen, and maybe there are more important ones than this. But this whole point is a federal issue. In other words, the Supreme Court doesn't like situations where various states, 5 states, say one thing and 23 states say the other. They want to be able to say it's one law and it runs across America. So it's very pertinent. I think Ghislaine has a very good case. Whether they take it, we don't know. But what I've been telling you with the government malfeasance, lying juror and so forth, there she doesn't rely on timing or the Supreme Court. She's entitled to run a motion of habeas corpus, perfectly entitled to, on the grounds of new evidence, likely to have made a difference at trial. And there's no question that the evidence would have made a substantial difference at trial. We know this because the lying juror told his interlocutor that one piece of evidence made a great deal of difference to the juror, another piece of evidence made a great deal of difference. And both of these pieces of evidence, the defense was not given an opportunity to contest because they were withheld material that was relevant to that defense. So, I mean, that's where I'm coming from on this, and that's definitely where Ghislaine is coming from, and it is news.
Well, the popular perception still, I think, of your sister is that she was a kind of Lady Macbeth figure to Epstein, that she enabled his crimes, that she helped solicit women to his residences, and also there's been lots of accusations that she helped him abuse women. Why are those theories, why is that understanding of her role in the Epstein story wrong?
There are a number of reasons. The most important reason, I think, is that the perception of this was created with 2 important events, which had nothing to do with the trial and would never have occurred in the English context for fear of contempt of court. And that is that at the moment of her arrest, the Southern District of New York Attorney General made an outrageous press conference which effectively made her guilty, pointed to pictures with her with Epstein, and used extraordinarily inappropriate language. That immediately fixed the image of Ghislaine in the mind of the general public, which was then flamed by the media. The second guilty party here is the late Virginia Giuffre, whose life really is bookended by lies. The first lie, perhaps best known, was when she had accused two young boys of rape when she was 17 or 18 years old. That was proven to not be true, and the jury decided not to go with her on that. And the last lie was when she accused a much-loved bus driver of ramming her at 70 miles an hour when no such thing ever happened. So this lady has had a history of trying to bring down people through lies, whether it was Prince Andrew or Alan Dershowitz, who was the only one who actually fought her, and she had to withdraw her lies. And it's sorry to have to say this. I know that the girl is dead. She had some difficult personal circumstances that we don't really know a lot of at the end of her life, but her life really has been very, very detrimental relating to parties, including my sister, which has caused untold misery.
What's your characterization then of your sister's relationship with Epstein? You felt that you disapproved of him from early on, as did your brother, I think. And yet she seemed to be trapped in a relationship with him, would you say?
I think, as I told you, I met him once very clearly in my memory in about 1996. By when the relationship between Epstein and my sister was on the wane, the personal, intimate relationship, if it hadn't already ended. I think they met originally in 1990, and by 96 it was more or less at the end. And my recollection at the time, it was at a lunch, I remember, with Kevin, my younger brother, and Ghislaine. I remember thinking, gosh, this is a very intelligent man, but he's not someone I would want to go and have a drink with. He's not very clubbable. You know, you could tell that he had a certain charisma. He asked very pointed questions, but it was all about eliciting information that might be helpful or valuable to him. It was nothing about having a good time or any kind of equality in terms of just a friendly conversation. And I think that that's important because it's quite clear that he did have a kind of Svengali control over people. He led a very, very compartmentalized life. We know that because, I know from my own experience with Ghislaine, when she was with him, frequently had no idea where he was. They didn't live together. And I think that he certainly broke her heart at some point. But the overall position is that she regrets ever having met him. Look what's happened to her.
If we could go back to the client list allegation, I think what a lot of people find suspicious or dubious is that Epstein could have been living this life of a voracious sexual abuser of young women and children, up to 1,000 victims, according to the FBI and the Department of Justice, while at the same time living this seemingly relentless party lifestyle with the rich and famous, and that those two worlds never overlapped. You can see why people find that odd.
I suppose if you take 1,000 victims, I've no idea how the authorities reached that figure, but however, let's take it for the purpose of this conversation. And you spread 1,000 victims across, 20 years? Something like that, maybe 25 years. What do we know? 1,000 across 25 years makes, it's an enormous number, but there can't have been that many simultaneously. in any given period of time. He was a very rich man. He had multiple bases. He had multiple modes of transport. He had multiple people working for him. I mean, I think it's not beyond one's imagination to see how you could flit from A to B to C and just keep moving, and the whole thing is kept very quiet. So I don't think it's wholly unimaginable. I mean, look at Donald Trump. I mean, there's another very rich, wealthy man who had led all kinds of complex life himself. So I think one can do it. What is important is that Ghislaine was unaware, I genuinely believe, of the complete depraved element of his fantasy life and how he went about it. And certainly during the period of the indictment, which was very, very tight in terms of its years involved. I mean, she had left him certainly by the end of 99, 2000, something like that. So I think, in terms of what happened after she left his life, his intimate personal life, I don't know what she has to say about that. I mean, I don't think she spent no time at all in connection with him after she had left him.
Well, there's another theory that I've read quite a lot online, and indeed in a couple of books, that your father was, of course, a very powerful publishing baron, a media titan in many ways, and that he was, as part of his complicated life, he was an agent for Mossad, the Israeli intelligence services, and that somehow Ghislaine, by dint of being his daughter, must be connected to that, and that helps explain possibly what was going on with Epstein and these various figures that he may or may not have been involving in his dubious activities.
I have to say, I worked for my father for 12 years, from 1978 to 1991, 11 years. And he never involved me in any such activities. He never involved my brother Kevin, as far as I know, and I find it almost impossible to think that he would have involved our sister in anything to do with the security services at all. I mean, she's already, by 1990, quite a well-known socialite, and I think it's not a very appropriate combination of socialite and Secret Service. So I don't personally buy it. I have no question at all that my father was extremely helpful to Israel at various points in the country's history, especially right at the start of the 1948 War of Independence, when he was clearly involved in helping to procure fighter planes for them. That, I think, is a matter of public record. And he was also crucial in ensuring that Vanunu, the spy who betrayed, or whatever, the official who betrayed the nuclear secrets of Israel, was arrested. So there's no question that he was important and helpful to Mossad. Mm. And I think also he may have had similar help to being able to give similar help to our own Secret Service. So I think he did have a side that very few people knew about, and certainly I and my family didn't know much about it until after he died.
You can't imagine how Ghislaine would have been connected to that.
No, I can't. And I don't see what does she bring to the party.
Well, I suppose people would imagine that you, being a socialite, does at that level of society, does give you access to important and powerful people.
And certainly, she did move in quite rarefied circles. That's for sure. But I think that you have to see that Ghislaine was really, when my father had died in November 1991. Our entire life and business out of the family blew up. My brother and I were put on trial. We had to remake our own life, and Ghislaine made her own life. So I think that looking back, it's a life that she wished she hadn't made it the way that she did. But certainly in the relevant period, this whole Epstein story, whatever potential involvement you suspect she might have had, I don't believe that she did have. That's my view.
Well, there was this extraordinary photograph of your sister, I think before her arrest, at an In-N-Out burger joint in, I'm not sure where it was, I think it was West Coast. And she was reading a book about, the secret lives of CIA agents. Do you think that photo faked? Was that a doctored photo, or was it just a very odd coincidence?
I've never known how that photograph came about. I really haven't. It was at a time when Ghislaine was no longer living at home with Scott, who we subsequently learned was her husband, and was concerned to stay away from her family, her two stepchildren, because of the enormous and invasive press and media presence. I think the most important thing about Ghislaine at that period was that she did not leave the United States. If she had thought, gosh, I'm going to be arrested any second, she would have left. She could have gone to France. She's a French national. They have no, they don't hand French citizens back to America, unlike our guys. We handed back Mike Lynch. So I think that is important, because she could not have imagined what was going to happen to her. And what happened has happened. She's now banged up for nearly 5 years. And what keeps her motivated and strong and her spirit intact and her physical being healthy is her absolute conviction of her innocence, her determination to demonstrate that the government has misbehaved, has shown deep malfeasance. The trial was not fair. She just did not get a fair trial. And that is where we find where we are, because she fought that trial with one arm tied behind her back. And one was that she was physically abused whilst waiting trial. And second was that her defense was physically attacked by not being made available to it exculpatory material, which I believe would materially have affected the outcome of the trial. And that's why the verdict is unsafe. And that's why I maintain that despite it all, despite all of the brouhaha over whether there was a client list or not, the reality is an innocent woman is in jail.
And tell us a little bit about her circumstances at the moment. She's in this prison in Florida, which is less of a brutal. She was in quite brutal conditions when we last spoke.
This is no open, low-level prison. It's a horrible place, dating from the 1930s. The facilities are old and decrepit. There is a significant overpopulation there. The food is atrocious. The conditions are really bad. And, we're hoping maybe she would be able to transfer, but that's a really complicated way, even within the United States. So she keeps busy by advising other prisoners on their legal rights. She knows her case absolutely backwards and forwards, and is able to advise her legal team how she wants things to be run. And she remains strong.
I suppose with all the massive global interest in this story, it's really her story and her own version of her story that we haven't heard much of. I mean, you've been kind enough to come on this show twice now. But when do you think we will hear her version of events? Will it only be when her name is cleared?
Well, I mean, we've got firstly, is the Supreme Court going to take her case? If it takes the case, it'll do so sometime this year. If it doesn't mean that she doesn't have a case, that particular case. It just means that they have decided not to go with it. So she moves, and this is not mutually exclusive. You can move in parallel to demonstrating to the world that her trial was not conducted fairly for some of the reasons that I've told you about. And that would lead, we hope, to potentially to a retrial and potentially an exoneration. I suppose, she could be suddenly pardoned, for all I know. That's another outcome, which may result in her being able to tell her truth and put her own story in front of the world to get it. But in order to get to any of these positions, we've got to exhaust the legal process, whether that's through the Supreme Court or through the district court upon hearing a motion of habeas corpus, or through pardon, or ultimately, I suppose, if none of this works and she's still banged up, then we would certainly look to repatriate her to the United Kingdom. Not have to serve out this barbaric term in the US.
And why is it, forgive my ignorance, why is it that telling her story publicly now, which presumably she could do even from behind bars, would inhibit her case in America?
I think the last time that Ghislaine was filmed without her knowledge was by an interview during an interview with an American journalist, or Israeli American journalist, I'm not sure which ended up on a show in Britain. Excerpts of this television, which in fact was filmed, I think, on a mobile camera. It was a video conference, a video call that was subsequently filmed or simultaneously filmed and then given to ITV. She was appallingly treated for that. She was put in the SHU, that's an isolation unit. All of her conditions were shut down. It was a horrible experience. And I don't think that she wants to go anywhere near having that experience again after this level of incarceration and so on. She's just prepared to wait her time. Her time will come. She is on the right side of history, and she has a fighting family, a fighting law firm, and a lot of people out there who perhaps don't want to say too much because they don't want to risk opprobrium and cancellation and so on, who do quietly support her. So that she keeps her spirits up through that.
Well, Ian Maxwell, we are very grateful to you for coming on to Spectator TV and the Americano show again. We hope we'll get you on again once more.